So to me, luxury high-end audio is all about an experience. It's about how it makes you feel, both when you listen to the product as well as when you look at it. And in my opinion, few brands in high-end audio consistently deliver on these elements like ACCUPHASE, which is probably why the brand is so well respected. Still, the problem is it tends to cost a lot of money. But today, I'm here to talk to you all about an entry point into their lineup that, even though it's definitely not cheap, you don't have to be in the highest income bracket in your country in order to afford one. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Alright, so here it is, the E-280 Integrated Amplifier. And I have to say, it's as gorgeous as I expected it to be. Now, one of the things I like so much about ACCUPHASE is they're one of the last established hi-fi brands that's independently owned, meaning that they're not owned by a bank or a venture capital company, meaning that they have the autonomy to do what they want to do, which I think is pretty cool. Now, back to the 280. This is a Class AB integrated amplifier that's rated at outputting 90 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 120 watts per channel into 4 ohms. It's both designed and practically handmade in Japan and carries a price tag of $6,000. So what do you get? Well, let's go ahead and turn on the unit. There's those gorgeous VU meters. You get exceptional build quality. Now, I'm not going to go over every feature. I have links in the description box for those of you who want those details, but I will give you some first impressions here. I have to say, the input selector knob has a great feeling to it, a great sound as well. We have tone controls, we have a phase selector button, mono, a loudness compensation button, an attenuator button. The volume control feels great. Just everything about this unit exudes class. So we're going to go ahead, turn it around, take a look at the back real quick. Then we're going to take a look under the hood, and then I'm going to talk about how it performs. Let's go. Okay, so here's the back of the 280, and as you can tell, this is a purely analog solution. We have a whole bunch of RCA inputs. We have a recorder in and out, a pre-out, a main in. We have these thick speaker terminals for your cables. You can technically power 4 speakers at the same time with this integrated, but those speakers will need to have an impedance rating of 8 ohms or higher. We have balanced inputs. Now, I did put in an inquiry to figure out whether or not this is a natively balanced circuit or if this is just a feature. I'll let you guys know in the description box once I get that answer. Moving on, we do have these slots for a DAC and a phono stage. This would come directly from ACCUPHASE. They're pretty expensive, but they are voiced to sound good with this integrated amp. Otherwise, that is going to be it for the back. So now let's pop the hood, and then we're going to talk about how it sounds. Alright, so here's the inside of the 280, and it's exactly what I would expect from an ACCUPHASE piece. Something that's beautiful on the inside as well as on the outside. And if you're an audiophile and you're looking at this, you can't help but be just a little bit turned on right now. Anyway, in the middle we have this large transformer. Next to that we have 2 large filter caps that are rated at 30,000 microfarads apiece. We have a volume control. And you'll notice that there's just an extreme amount of precision inside of this chassis. It's very similar to the build quality of the E-480 that I have. No, it's not quite on the same level. It's not as compartmentalized among the different circuits, but it is really good for something in this price range. So now it's time to talk about whether or not this excellent build quality translates into really good sound quality. Let's go. So when it comes to performance, what you're getting out of the E-280 is more than just this well-made machine with a respected brand name on the chassis, because this integrated amp delivers great performance for the money. So ultimately, it's for somebody who values a natural and organic sounding mid-range, strong yet controlled bass, treble that is neutral in its delivery, meaning that it's not tilted up or rolled off, and it's for somebody who values a 3-dimensional, spacious listening experience. Now, clearly, it's not going to be for everybody, right? If you're all about a strong, dynamic sound or more of a lively and forward presentation, you will likely prefer other options. But if you're somebody who prefers to listen into the music versus having it shoved in your face, then there's a good chance you're really going to like the sound of this integrated. And that leads me to the details. Okay, so the bottom line is that the E280 has that classic ACCUPHASE sound. There's great balance between the treble, the mid-range, and the bass, and overall it has a sonic character that I would describe as being slightly warm and laid-back sounding. Because remember, the E280 is not meant to impress you with audiophile fireworks. Instead, it's meant to invite you to listen into the music so you can have a relaxing listening experience. And that leads me to the details, starting with the treble. Now, I need to be very clear about this. Whenever somebody mentions that a component has a laid-back and warm sound, usually that means the treble is rolled off. But that's not what's happening here with the E280 because, as I mentioned earlier, it's neutral in its delivery. It's not tilted up. It's not rolled off. Instead, it's going to represent what your recordings and what your speakers actually sound like. Now, the good news is there are tone controls. So if you want to add a little bit more spice to the sound, you can do it. Or if you want to take away a little bit of treble, you can do that. But ultimately, don't expect it to sound like this cozy, smooth, warm blanket at all times. Now, if you are coming from a component that has tilted up treble, then you may find it to be just a little bit smooth sounding by comparison. Now, when it comes to the treble performance, overall, what you're getting is something that's directly in line with what you would expect from a $6,000 integrated amp. It is effortlessly detailed. It sounds great at low listening volumes, great spatial separation, great tone. I don't think too many people are going to complain about it. Next, let's talk about the mid-range because, oh my gosh, when it comes to tone, this thing is an absolute monster, especially when it comes to the recreation of the human voice, piano, stringed instruments. I mean, there's this great balance between scale, body, and yet having something that still feels nimble and open and detailed. It, in many respects, is on the cusp of sounding like a really good tube amplifier in terms of harmonic richness and body, and yet it doesn't go so far as to homogenize the listening experience. It's really good. I can't imagine any speaker sounding thin in the mid-range with the E280, and it just makes for a very pleasant listening experience, and there's just enough gravitas, just enough heft to make it sound appropriate with non-audiophile music like rock and roll, electronic, or even hip-hop for that matter. Next, let's talk about the bass. The bass is pretty strong, and this is where that warm character comes in. There's a little bit extra to the bass, and yet it is still controlled. You can still pair this up with speakers that have these thick woofers, and it's still going to take decent control of them. Now, is it going to be the quickest and most agile bass in the world? No, but I think it's going to be good enough for most listeners, and it's definitely very impressive for something its size. Now, there is going to be a limitation, and that's going to be in terms of dynamic output. Look, it is serviceable for an integrated amp at this price and its size, but ultimately, if you're somebody who listens to classical music and you're all about enjoying those peak dynamic contrasts whenever the music starts exploding during those crescendos, then the only way you're going to get that experience out of this integrated is when you pair it up to sensitive speakers like, say, the Klipsch Heritage line or even Tecton speakers. But on average sensitivity speakers, the dynamic output's going to be okay. Next, let's talk about imaging. Now, this is something I rarely talk about with electronic components because usually they don't have that much of an impact on the soundstage. Usually that's more a function of speakers. But that's not the case with the E280. It actually helps speakers to deliver even more of a spacious, almost three-dimensional soundstage, which I definitely did not expect from ACCUPHASE. Typically, they kind of go in the other direction, but the E280, yeah, it's a lot of fun to listen to in that regard. And that leads me to speaker matching. So this is something I'm frequently asked about in pretty much every review. And when it comes to the ACCUPHASE, you don't need to worry too much about the voicing of your speaker and whether or not it's going to work well with the ACCUPHASE, because the answer is it probably will. What you need to ask yourself is, does it have enough power for your speakers in your room at the volumes that you listen at? Does it also have the kind of sound that you think you would like? If the answer is yes to both, then it doesn't matter if you own Wilsons or Focals or whatever. Odds are it's going to sound good to your ears. You just need to make sure that it has the kind of presentation you like and it has enough power for your needs. Anyway, that is going to be it for the performance summary. So now let's give this review some context by going over some comparisons. Okay, so to kick things off, let's talk about how the E280 stacks up to another integrated amp in the same general price range, the Luxman 550. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this camera on a tripod. That way I can sit back and talk to you all from behind the camera versus trying to walk and talk at the same time. So let's go ahead and do that. Bam. So here's the deal. I think this is a very fair comparison because the Luxman is another high-quality Japanese integrated amp that retails for $6,500 as opposed to the ACCUPHASE $6,000. It's a 70 watt per channel Class AB amplifier with the first 20 watts being biased into Class A operations. So ultimately they're even similar in terms of raw power output. Now when it comes to performance, if ACCUPHASE is on the slightly reserved and warm side of neutral, then Luxman goes in the different direction by being a bit more on the forward side of neutral. So people who find the ACCUPHASE to be just a little too laid back for their taste will absolutely prefer Luxman's more direct and energetic way of presenting music, thanks to a mild boost in the treble. And speaking of those kinds of details, the bass performance is practically identical on both units, with the slight edge going to the Luxman in terms of bass control. The mid-range on both units is actually pretty similar to one another, however, they do have a slightly different way of doing things. The ACCUPHASE has a slightly more organic sound, whereas Luxman has a slightly cleaner presentation. And then when it comes to the amp's impacts on a speaker soundstage, both are pretty good. The Luxman actually does a better job of giving you a rock-solid image in between the speakers, whereas the ACCUPHASE does a better job of delivering a wider soundstage. So in a nutshell, look, the Luxman offers up a slightly cleaner and more lively sound, whereas the ACCUPHASE offers up more of an intimate and spacious listening experience. While I think people will absolutely prefer one presentation over the other, I think it's possible for most people to walk away with mutual respect for both of these products. So as always, it's just a matter of which one you prefer, both in terms of looks as well as sound. Let's move on. Okay, so while this may not be a fair comparison, I think this is a fair question to ask, which is, what do you get when you go from the entry point into the ACCUPHASE lineup to the flagship of their Class AB integrated amplifiers, which currently is the E-480? Now, let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Aside from a difference in size, there's also a gigantic difference in terms of price and power. First, let's talk about the power. The E-480 is rated at outputting 180 watts per channel into 8 ohms, which is double that of the 90 watts per channel of the E-280. And then beyond that, there's the price difference. The 480 retails for, are you ready for it? $15,000, or at least that's the price in the US. Whereas the E-280 retails for a still expensive but much more reasonable $6,000. So, what does the flagship integrated bring to the table? Well, as you can imagine, it has a lot more power, and you hear it. The entire presentation has more drive and far more dynamic headroom, meaning that it'll power just about any speaker you can think of, whereas the 280, you're going to have to be a bit more tactical about whether or not your speakers or your listening tastes require more power. Now, beyond the benefits in terms of power, the E-480 has a sound that's basically like a cleaner and slightly more refined version of the E-280. It's more transparent. It's more neutral. It's more controlled with the bass. It has slightly better detail. So it's basically the ACCUPHASE sound with better technical performance and a lot more cojones. Having said that, there's still a chance that you may prefer the sound of the 280 because what it offers is a slightly more spacious sound in terms of soundstage width, and it overall has a more romantic presentation, which creates a more intimate listening experience. All in all, I think they're both fantastic pieces. I won't be giving up my E-480 for the 280, but I like the 280 so much that, you know what, I may just add it to my collection. Anyway, that's it for the comparisons, so let's move on, go over some caveats, and then let's wrap this review up. Okay, so while the E-280 definitely has a lot going for it, it's not perfect, and there are some caveats worth mentioning, so let's go ahead and get the common sense ones out of the way first. Number one, look, as with every component, not everyone's going to like the sound. Number two, it's not a powerhouse, right? I mean, yes, 90 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 120 into 4 ohms is respectable, and that is good enough for many listeners, but it's not going to be enough for all listeners. So if you're in a large room or you listen at very loud volumes, or if you have speakers that are very difficult to drive, you may need a bit more power than what this integrated has on tap. And then next, and this is where the compromises get a little bit more valid, which is the tone controls. They're plastic. You know, I actually didn't know this until a reviewer called me and he asked me, hey, do you know if the ACCUPHASE tone controls are plastic? And I was like, I don't think so. But then I got this in for a review and I felt them and I was like, by God, they are. Now, I know some people are going to be pretty upset by this, mostly people who aren't actually going to be customers. In fact, I can see the comment section right now, like, this is unacceptable. But the bottom line is this. This is their entry-level piece, and while $6,000 is a lot of money, it's something that I can look past, especially when I look at the rest of the build quality and the sound quality that you get for the money. But still, I could see some people being turned off by this because the expectation is that everything on this product would be metal. So again, it's minorly disappointing, but in my opinion, it's not a big deal. You may feel differently. Anyway, that is going to be it for most of the caveats. I mean, pretty common sense stuff. So let's go ahead and wrap up this review. Okay, so now that this evaluation is pretty much over, I'm going to wrap up this video with some real talk, and I'm also going to reveal what I really think about the E280. Now, first, I don't mind saying that I didn't know what I was getting into with this review. Because last year, I reviewed this integrated amp's bigger brother, the E480, and while I really liked it, so much so that I got it for myself, the bottom line is, here in the United States, it's not a good value. In fact, now that the price went up again, I will even go so far as to say that the E480 is just straight up overpriced in the US market. And I was afraid that the E280 was just going to go in the same direction. Was ACCUPHASE going to bring it? Well, it didn't take long to figure out that, yeah, they did. In fact, they've done such a good job with the E280 that I have to be honest, unless you need more power or you just want that organic sound, but you still want more of that powerful dynamic audiophile experience, I mean, it's almost a no-brainer to go in this direction instead. Because this, I'm going to be controversial here, in my opinion, is an actual value. You're getting what you're paying for. When you spend $6,000 on this unit, you're going to notice the build quality and it's going to instill confidence because odds of you requiring any kind of service on this integrated amp for the first 10 years of regular use is almost non-existent. Maybe after 15 or 20 years of use, it'll require some moderate service, but even then, odds are ACCUPHASE is still going to be around and odds are they will still have the components necessary for you to service it and bring it back up to spec. There's something to be said about that. But even beyond the build quality, which is pretty uncompromising for something in its price class, there's the sound. And that's what I was nervous about the most. I thought the sound was probably going to be, romantic, but maybe average or missing on details or some of the things that you want from a $6,000 integrated amp. But no, it doesn't. It delivers exactly what you would expect from an ACCUPHASE component, and yet it still delivers exceptional sound quality. And as I mentioned earlier, I could see some people actually preferring the sound of this integrated over its bigger brother because it does have a slightly more romantic sound. And speaking of which, yeah, I love the sound of this integrated amp. I mean, come on. A spacious, organic presentation with strong bass, revealing treble, with something that looks this good and is built this well, yeah, sign me up. And I'm actually not joking there. I actually put my name in for one of these integrated amps. I should be getting it sometime next year. Yeah, I know I don't need it, but that's luxury high-end. We don't need this stuff. It's not food, it's not water, it's not oxygen. We buy it because of how it makes us feel. We buy it because it makes us happy. Having this around makes me happy. Unfortunately, I have to send it back in about a day or so. But it's been a pleasure spending time around it, and I think it's definitely something worth checking out for people who think they would like this kind of look and this kind of sound. Anyway, that is going to be my take on the E280. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.